You're listening to The Jacob Valk Show. He's breaking down the latest and greatest in sports as only he can. Follow him on Twitter at RealJacobValk. Here he is, Jacob Valk.
Hello, sports fans. Welcome to another edition of the Jacob Valk Show. I am Jacob Valk, and nothing really happened in the past 24 hours in the sports world. Obviously, in the real world, we're getting back to normalcy with the coronavirus, and the death of George Floyd has captivated the nation. Thoughts and prayers go out to him and his family. The police were obviously in the wrong, and they should be held accountable to the fullest extent of the law. The one thing I'll say is there's no excuse to go rioting and vandalizing and looting, but I understand why people are frustrated. I'd be frustrated too. Hopefully the situation calms down and the real villains in this story, the cops who murdered Floyd, are held accountable. Okay, on to sports. It's time to start the trifecta with the Indianapolis Colts' 2020 NFL Draft Class Recap. The Colts traded their first-rounder to the Niners for DeForest Buckner, but they made up for it by having 2 seconds. Actually, now that I'm looking at it, they didn't use one of their own picks until the 4th round. They had 2 seconds, one from the Redskins and one from the Browns, and then the 3rd rounder was from the Eagles via the Lions. Out of all the picks they made, only 2 of them originally belonged to them. The 122nd overall pick and the 193rd overall pick. Kind of interesting. Michael Pittman was a fantastic pick for the Colts, filled a huge need for him. T.Y. Hilton's a really good wide receiver, has been extremely underrated throughout most of his career. But he's not getting any younger. He was hurt a little bit last year, and you saw it. When he went down, the Colts passing game fell apart. I mean, how much can you rely on guys like Chester Rogers and Zach Pascal and Paris Campbell? They're just not great. The jury's still out on Campbell, but those other 2 guys aren't that good. Pittman filled a huge need. For my money, he was the 36th best prospect in this draft. Some of the best ball skills in this draft. Had a great year last year at USC. Caught over 100 passes for 1,275 yards and 11 touchdowns. Had him on my college fantasy football team, but I dropped him. That was really stupid of me, but I ended up winning the league anyway, so all's well that ends well. The thing that a lot of people don't like about him is his speed. He ran just a 4.52 40 at the Combine, and when you watched him play at USC, he wasn't running past a lot of corners. He got his catches mostly by great ball placement and just using his frame. He has a really good frame, 6'4", 223. I like Pittman a lot. Filled a huge need for the Colts. Him and Hilton together should be scary for Phillip Rivers. Man, that is weird to say, that Phillip Rivers is a Colt. Then again, it's weird to say that Tom Brady is a Buccaneer. Jonathan Taylor was viewed by some people as the best running back in this draft. I know Nick felt that way. I personally didn't. I had DeAndre Swift ahead of him. But I did think that Taylor was the 34th best player in this draft. His production at Wisconsin was legendary. It's not a stretch to say that he is one of the best college football running backs of all time. I mean, he followed in that Ron Dane mold of just destroying the opponent. Absolutely destroying them. I think that Taylor is a future college football Hall of Famer. And when you look to how that'll translate to the pros, he has great vision, great patience. His speed is off the charts, ran a sub 4.40, is really athletic. He's a powerful back. At just 5'10", it's rare to find someone that small that can be as powerful as him. The thing is, this is a league that is transitioning over to running backs needing to catch the ball. And Jonathan Taylor is not a good pass-catching back. But from that end of things, I don't think that it'll matter that much with the Colts. They already have Nyheim Hines. Marlon Mack isn't a terrible pass catcher. He's not great. He's not terrible. I don't think that'll affect Taylor that much. What I didn't like about that pick was the Colts didn't really need Taylor. They already had Mack. 1,000-yard running back last year. Really underrated. They had Nyheim Hines. Really good pass catcher. Out of the backfield. I wouldn't have minded it if the Colts picked a running back in day 3, but to take one in the second round when you had two huge needs staring you in the face at defense, I didn't like that pick. I love the player. I think Jonathan Taylor is going to be a really, really, really good player in this league for a long time. I just didn't think the Colts needed to pick him. I like Julian Blackmon a lot. In my New York Jets draft preview, I thought the Jets could take him in day 3. I'm not going to say too many bad things about him. The only thing I'll say is to take him in the 3rd round was an egregious reach. He was not a 3rd round prospect. Alright, he was a day 3 prospect. It's just that simple. He has huge durability concerns. His cover skills are anemic. But he's the kind of guy who can play center field in the secondary and just swat balls away. He's the guy who's going to come in over the top and knock balls away. He's average in run support. He played well last year at Utah. That's what I really liked about him. His play at Utah, when you were watching Jalen Johnson, Blackmon just came out of nowhere and made you pay attention to him. I liked that a lot. I think Blackmon's going to be a good player in this league, but to take him in the 3rd round was a reach. Although, the one thing I'll say is, it filled a big need that the Colts had in the secondary. They're not high on Malik Hooker anyway, so I don't despise the pick, but I don't love the pick. The Colts picking Jacob Eason, in my opinion, was one of the best picks in this draft. I was probably the biggest Jacob Eason fan outside of his family. This is a guy who I had as the 44th best prospect in this draft. I had him going 23rd overall to the Patriots. Yes, it was a huge reach if the Patriots were to have taken him in the 1st round, but It would have been forgivable because that was really their only need. Eason is the prototypical pocket passer. I mean, his arm strength is insane. He's really accurate, had to overcome a lot of adversity. Enrolls at Georgia, has to transfer to Washington in order to play. I think he's very pro-ready, and I think he landed in a great spot with the Colts. He can learn from a borderline Hall of Famer in Phillip Rivers and a very good former quarterback in Frank Reich. And the year after this coming season, he can take over for Rivers. I think it's a match made in heaven. I thought the Colts taking Jacob Eason was one of the best picks of this draft. Period. Not even close. They followed it up with a really bad one, though. Danny Pinter was a borderline undraftable prospect to me. He started as a tight end, moved over to offensive line late. His technique is terrible. His run blocking is really good, but it's going to take a long time for him to develop into a solid offensive lineman. It's rare that you can find a J.R. Sweezy who can make that transition that seamlessly. I did not like the Pinter pick in the 5th round. Truthfully, I wouldn't have even been shocked if he was undrafted. You take a shot on him in undrafted free agency, you see if you can develop him. I think Pinter is not cut out for this league. I'd be really surprised if he made it. They followed that up, though, with a really good pick. Robert Windsor is a jack-of-all-trades, master of none. He's solid against the run, solid against the pass, good athletically, tough player. The thing is, I'm not crazy about the suspension that he had for the 2019 Citrus Bowl for a violation of team rules. That knocked his grade down a lot. I don't think he should have slipped to the 5th round. I had a 4th round grade on him. It was an early 4th round grade, though, I will say that. The talent is there for Windsor. He just has to keep his head screwed on straight. So now we move to the end of the 6th round. The Colts had the Chiefs' 6th round pick. They got it from the Jets, actually. The Chiefs traded their 6th to the Jets for Darren Lee. And then the Jets flipped it to the Colts for Quincy Wilson. Really good trade for the Jets. That made a ton of sense. But the main reason that I'm bringing this up is the Colts had 3 straight picks. 211, 212, and 213. They had the last pick in the main part of the 6th round and the first 2 compensatory picks in the 6th round. I don't think I've ever seen that before. I've seen teams make back-to-back picks. I've never seen a team make back-to-back-to-back picks. That's strange. The Colts replaced Wilson with another corner. Isaiah Rodgers has a lot of talent, great ball skills, finished with 11 career interceptions at Massachusetts. He returned 3 of them for touchdowns. He has great kick return talent, great punt return talent. I think we're going to see Isaiah Rodgers in this league for a long time. This fit his range also as a late 6th rounder. Really, really good pick for the Colts. Desmond Patman was on the lower end of the spectrum of great wide receivers that we had this year in the draft. I'm not a big fan of his. He doesn't use his big frame that well. He's 6'4", 225, but he gets bullied a lot. He gets a case of the dropsies way too much. He's really strong. His frame is fantastic. He's the kind of guy who you want to like. You just can't. There's not a lot there. It's going to take a lot of work for Desmond Patman to turn into a really good wide receiver. I also don't like that the Colts double-dipped at wide receiver. Jordan Glasgow was one of the best special teamers in this draft. This was the perfect range for him. He's going to play 10 years in this league. Reminds me a lot of Matthew Slater. He is a man without a position, though. He can only play special teams. I don't like him at linebacker. I don't think he'll do well there if pushed into game action. But put him solely on special teams, and he's fantastic. He recorded 27 career special teams tackles at Michigan. That's pretty darn good. I'm not saying that he's going to have the career of a Slater or a Steve Tasker, but I think he can be an integral part of a team's special teams for a long time. I'm kind of surprised the Patriots didn't take him. He fits that mold to me. All in all, I loved a few of their picks. I didn't like some of their picks. I mean, that's par for the course with a draft. I'm in a good mood today. I'll give the Colts a B-. I think that's fair. Alright, it's time for this day in sports history. I'm gonna bend the rules a little bit. Not a lot happened on this day in sports history. No big birthdays today of anyone who's passed away. I don't want to do someone who's already alive because it makes no sense to recap their career. You know all about Carmelo Anthony. You don't need me to tell you about him. So, I'm gonna make it tomorrow in sports history just for today. I don't like doing this, but there's not much I can do about it. Believe me, it's May 29th, alright? We should be in the thick of baseball, the NHL playoffs, and the NBA playoffs. I don't want to do evergreen stuff right now, but I have to give you good content. Tomorrow, in 1976, Max Carey passed away at the age of 86. It's okay if you don't know the name Max Carey. He played from 1910 to 1929. But in his time, there was no base runner on the planet that was feared more than him. In his rookie year, Carey didn't set the world on fire. Only hit .258 with 5 homers and 43 RBIs, and he only had 27 steals. That's not great. It's not terrible. That's not a bad rookie season by any stretch, but it's not what he would do later in life. In fact, he didn't have to wait that long to make an impact, as in 1912, he hit .302 with 5 homers and 68 RBIs to go along with 45 steals. The year after that, he led the National League in steals for the first time, definitely not the last, with 61 steals. He also hit .277 with 5 homers and 49 RBIs. You sensing a theme with the 5 home runs? He wasn't a power hitter, but very few people were back then. That started a trend for Carey, as from 1913 to 1925, he led the National League in steals in 9 of those 12 seasons. And if you want to narrow it down to leading Major League Baseball in steals, he did that 5 times. One year that I want to focus on is 1919. That was one of the years that Carey didn't lead the National League in steals. He had 307 that year with no homers, 9 RBIs, and only 18 steals. In his career, he averaged 48. Well, why are you talking about it then, Jacob? Well, he got hurt and missed a lot of the season. But then he came back in 1920 to hit 289 and lead the National League in steals with 52. I just think that's incredible. To come back from an injury and lead the league in steals. I just think that's really, really impressive. At the end of the 1924 season, and I did not know this, people ask me all the time, Jacob, do you know all this stuff about the people who you talk about in this day in sports history? I know most of it, but doing research on Wikipedia and Baseball Reference helps flesh out some of the minor points. I did not know this. At the end of the 24 season, Carey changed his batting stance to resemble that of Ty Cobb's. Carey didn't need help with hitting. The year prior, he had hit 297 with 8 homers and 55 RBIs. But he wanted to get better. I mean, at that time, he had a 286 average. He wanted to be better. Nothing wrong with wanting to be better. Carey's change in batting stance resulted in him hitting .343 with 5 homers and 44 RBIs. He led Major League Baseball in steals with 46. Came as close as he ever would to an MVP, which back then was called the Chalmers Award. He placed 11th in NL MVP voting, and he led the Pirates to a pennant. They would face the Senators in the World Series. Carey was insane, hit .458 with no homers, but 2 RBIs and 3 steals. He had 11 hits in that series. 4 of them were doubles. Even though Walter Johnson was insane in that series, we all know that Walter Johnson is one of the best pitchers in postseason history. Carey led his team to victory, and the Pirates won the 25 World Series. You'd think that would result in an extension of his career. He was 35 years old, but he had just hit .343. Well, not necessarily. Midway through the 26th season, Carey was in a really bad slump. I don't know what exactly happened, but 25 was his last great season. The manager of the Pirates was Bill McKechnie. McKechnie's in the Baseball Hall of Fame, as was his assistant, basically a modern-day bench coach, Fred Clark. Clark said to McKechnie that Carey should be benched, the Pirates should prepare for the future, and Carey didn't like that. I don't blame him. I mean, maybe it wouldn't have hurt for him to play around with his batting stance again, go back to what worked before, or change something else, maybe take a few days off. I don't know what exactly happened. History is spotty on that. But Carey called a team meeting where the players voted on whether Clark should remain on the bench during games. Back then, there weren't as many coaches as there are today. The players voted 18-6 in favor of Clark remaining on the bench. When Clark found out about the meeting, 3 players were disciplined, or at least 3. Babe Adams and Carson Bigby were released. You don't need to know those names. But Carey was suspended, was then placed on waivers, and was claimed by the Brooklyn Robins. He finished his career there, wasn't that great. In 2007, he had a solid season, hit .266 with 1 homer and 54 RBIs, had 32 steals. That was his last good season, and he'd retire in 1929. After that, he'd manage the Brooklyn Dodgers, formerly known as the Brooklyn Robins. Carey was not a great manager, didn't get along with his players, and was fired after 2 seasons. But that shouldn't diminish his legacy. When he retired, his 738 steals was a National League record. It wasn't until 1974 that Lou Brock broke it. Carey was elected to the Hall of Fame in 1961, as he should have been. He has over 2,600 hits, 2,665 to be specific. Was a great player. May he rest in peace. Alright, it is time for the last baseball Mount Rushmore. Closing it out with the defending World Series champions, the Washington Nationals. As we all know, they moved from Montreal to the nation's capital, so I will include at least one expo here. The correct Mount Rushmore is Steven Strasburg, Max Scherzer, Ryan Zimmerman, and Steve Rogers. The reason I'm putting Strasburg ahead of Scherzer is because Strasburg has spent his whole career with the Nationals. Since 2010, he's been there for 10 seasons. He's probably going to retire as a National. I mean, he signed a huge contract last year. So I'm giving him the edge over Scherzer, who spent 7 years not in DC, 2 with the Diamondbacks, and 5 with the Tigers. But as we all know, Strasburg and Scherzer were the anchors of the Nationals' World Series winning team. Ryan Zimmerman leads the franchise in hits and home runs. Has been a really good player. Yeah, injuries have knocked him down a few pegs, but he can still play. He can still produce. He's not the player he once was, but he's a really good player. And Steve Rogers leads the franchise in wins and is second in strikeouts. Was a 5-time All-Star, led Major League Baseball in ERA in 1982, spent his whole career with the Expos. I had to give Captain America the final spot. I hope you have a good weekend. Hope you don't go stir crazy. It's starting to get to me now. I feel like I've done all I can do. The novelty behind this has worn off. I'm ready to get back to reality. It seems like we're getting there, though. We should get live sports at least in July. Hopefully in June. I'm not a NASCAR fan or a golf fan, so if you are, you have something, but I don't. Until Monday, I am Jacob Valk saying, if a guy is a good fastball hitter, Does that mean I should throw him a bad fastball?